Hello, this is Brad Handler with the Payne Institute. In this installment of our Just Transition podcast series, we discuss the Just Transition's efforts underway in Alberta, Canada. The province of Alberta announced in 2015 that it would accelerate the closure of coal mines and coal-fired power. The official deadline for coal plant closures is 2029, but a number of mines and plants are closing much more quickly. The province and the Canadian federal government have both funded Just Transition policies. Over the course of this podcast, I weave together conversations with 4 officials in affected communities in Alberta to get their perspective on how they're responding to the closures and what help they've been getting from both the provincial and federal Just Transition programs. As you'll hear, the communities are different. The representatives argue that they are all rural, but one borders on Edmonton, while the other 2 are more remote. And they believe they have different needs as a result. There are, however, some similarities for what they would like the government to help them do, including support to build out infrastructure that they've identified, both bricks and mortar and information technology, to help their citizens and businesses. The 4 people you'll hear from in this podcast are Laura Swain, Interim Chief Administrative Officer of Parkland County. Parkland borders on Edmonton, although it's a large area, and again, Laura describes it largely as rural. It has 32,000 residents. Chris Warwick, Mayor of the town of Hanna. Hanna is 100 miles from Calgary and has 2,500 residents. And then 2 representatives of Battle River, which encompasses 7 communities in a wide rural expanse. That expanse is about 100 miles outside of Edmonton. George Glazier is the chairman of the Battle River Economics Opportunity Committee, or BREOC, and Don Kroetch is the mayor of Flagstaff County, one of the 7 communities, and is BREOC's vice chairman. Let's start with a couple of comments describing perceptions of the differences between their communities. First, George and then Don of Battle River describe differences to Parkland and their sense of the nature of a rural community.
We were very different from Parkland, because Parkland, the workers can drive down the road to the city of Edmonton and they can get a job somewhere else. In the county of Payne or county of Flagstaff, those workers have to move away in order to get a job.
Yeah, I think that spirit in rural Alberta, probably in any rural setting, is that you got to do it yourself or get at it. And we're very adaptable in the farming industry because that changes. We have a lot of stressors on our agriculture community through conditions we cannot control, which is weather, market access with China and Asia. You know, that's always changing. And with the oil and gas, it's very cyclical. You probably know that. So we're very rural Albertans, and our business community is very adaptable to change. And this is another change that we've already had the skill set through the recession or the oil and gas crash into the 80s and the 90s, and the closing of the borders of China for our agriculture. So we found new markets and we changed products. We went to the protein market. BSE in our livestock issue about 10 years ago really closed the borders to a lot of our beef products. But our beef producers transitioned that, and they did more local stuff and they found new markets. So we're really adaptable to change. It doesn't scare us. I think we have the skill set that's been here for 50 years to adapt change. But this was a big one. This is very locally, the transition of the coal and power plant is very local and focused. So it is different, absolutely. But we do have a lot of skill set within the community to adapt to change.
And now Mayor Chris Warwick of Hanna describes his community and suggests it bears the largest impact of all from coal closures. He also notes differences between Hanna and the Battle River area.
I think we were definitely at the forefront, especially here in Alberta. We had a unique situation compared to the other mines in the province, because we have our mine facility and our power plant are probably 95% of the folks that work out there live in our community. That's not the same anywhere else in Alberta. So we're probably affected, greater per capita, I guess, than anywhere else. So I think that's where we felt it was really important to get ahead of the ball game and really lobby the government, both federal and provincial, on behalf of our residents more than anything. I mean, it's hard in a small rural community, kind of off a main corridor, like Edmonton to Calgary in Alberta. That's your main corridor. That's where the majority of the population lives. We're on a really high volume, heavy load corridor, but there's, it's just basically trucks taking stuff from the States up to Fort McMurray, and along the line, there's lots of oil and gas work happening along this sector. So we see a lot of that kind of traffic, but honestly, all you need to do is realize that this is human beings. This is is live. This is people that have been here for generations. One of the things that we were really concerned about, and still are, a lot of the folks that work either at the generating station or the coal mine itself are farmers that are subsidizing their farming operations with, because they can't make it completely 100% on the ag. Exactly. Here, you don't have cattle to the acre, you have acres to the cow. So then these folks, they're third generation ranchers and farmers that want to stay in the region, and they're subsidizing it with working at the coal mine or the generating station, and still have the love of the ag business, and they want to maintain that. In the Battle River region, there's more job opportunities than there is in our region. There's a ton of oil and gas up there. Well, oil and gas right now isn't all that lucrative, but back in the day, it certainly was. So it was kind of easier to take these folks that are in the coal or generating business and retrain them to go into oil and gas or whatever it happens to be. Here, you can't really train people to be farmers because you got to buy the land. So we figured, we knew actually, not figured, we knew that part of our community was looked after, the retraining and then looking after our employees that are going to lose their jobs. That's taken care of. The issue is we can retrain people. We love that idea, but we don't want to retrain them to move. Yeah. We want to retrain them to stay in Hanna. That's always been, that's been our message through this whole thing to both the province and the feds.
Because of these differences, these areas have different approaches for how they're trying to offset the economic impact and replace the jobs lost from the accelerated coal transition. Here is Laura Swain of Parkland County.
We're very focused on economic development at Parkland County. I mean, our overarching goal for the past 4 years has really been the replacement of coal. So that has been our overarching municipal goal, is that we want to replace the loss of coal revenue in the next 5 years. So that's really been a main focus of our investment attraction and our economic development program. And we've worked really hard to move that forward. And so we have an industrial park, which is on the west end of the county, which borders Edmonton. So working to bring in more industry in that industrial park and making sure we really have the land service to do that. And then also looking at, the coal plants on the complete other end of the county. So looking at bringing in investment on that end of the county too, since that's where a lot of the jobs have been lost. And then looking at we're currently in the preliminary stages of planning for a new industrial area. And so there's obviously some complications with zoning and land use and our growth board, like our municipal growth board, which we're part of with other municipalities, that goes into that. But that's another area we're looking at to try and supplement coal stuff, is just trying to make sure we have as much shovel-ready land as possible for development.
Parkland's also looking to save money by sharing services with the adjacent suburbs of Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, overcoming different expectations of what services local government normally provides. Here's Laura again.
There was one fund, which was a fund for a regional plan. So looking at all the different services that we provide as Parkland County, and then Parkland County, we're very large geographically, but we border City of Edmonton, which is a major urban center here. I live in City of Edmonton, actually. And so a lot of our people live urban but work rural. And so working with Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, who are their own independent local governments within us, working on sorting out what are some areas that we can look at for efficiencies moving into the future, and how can we adjust to the phase out of coal, because that's a impact to us as Parkland County, but also to Stony Plain and Spruce Grove somewhat because of the spin-off and because of the jobs. So how can we work together to realize some of those efficiencies? So we're really deep into that project, looking at all different areas like land use, economic development, utilities, culture, social, like housing, everything.
Turning to Hanna, its story is more of an evolution. First, grasping for a single solution that would fall through, and then backing up and figuring out more of a multi-pronged approach. As Chris describes,
we came up with an idea. We thought, you know what, if this government, because it was a very left-wing government, they're all about the environment, all about, saving, cutting back on carbon-based fuels. And so we thought, you know what, why don't we have them build us a solar generating station down on the mine old mined lands, so that utilizes the old mined lands.
Yep.
You're right. And so it's a beautiful story. We thought they'd really buy into it. So what we asked for was for them to literally build a 30 megawatt solar generating field and just give it to us. We were back and forth with the government. They kept pushing us, kept saying, you know what, we like this idea. We think it's got some value. We can see it would really help your region. So it came to, oh gosh, I don't even know what year it was. It must have been the fall of 18, and we had spent a pile of money. The government did give us some money to put in towards the investigation and some of the early research. But the ATCO and this other, Green Gate Power was the other company, the renewables company, they put in probably $250,000. ATCO probably put in $250,000. We did, only to have the government say, yeah, we can't give you a PPA, so a power purchase arrangement. We can't give you that without it going through, because they were doing a bunch of auctions and all that kind of stuff. They said, we just can't sole source this. So I said to them, thanks for nothing. We did all this work. We spent taxpayers' dollars, $250,000. Didn't cost us anything other than being the taxpayer. There is only one of us. So they said, yeah, sorry, we just can't do that. I said, okay, what's the options? Where do we go from here? That was late 2018, probably the fall of 2018. Then that government, what we call up here in Alberta, dropped the writ, so called an election. So everything stopped. They lost the election in the spring of 2019, April of 2019, which we knew from our perspective, it was going to be the end of any of these projects because the government, the right-wing government that came in said, we're not doing it. We're going to get rid of the carbon tax that they instilled. That's going to fix all your problems. And that's where we stand with the province today. So then we said, okay, what do we need to do? Well, we need to have a direction. We need to have a strategic plan, but something that's very solid. It's going to set us, take us to the next level, to the next chapter. So that's where we hired 13 Ways, and they came and we did a really extensive interview process with both residents and with council, just to see what direction do we want to go in. What is the best fit for Hanna? The 13 Ways study, I won't get into detail. It kind of, we utilized a little bit of our asset management study we did a couple of years before that. So he compiled that. He said, look, I'm not going to do all this over again. I'm going to take what they did and let's come up with a strategic plan that is actually a working document that you could go ahead with.
It almost sounds like your initial reaction was, okay, maybe we can really just push solar, and that can almost swap it out, almost like if not one for one, then get us pretty close. But it's tempting for me to say, well, no, you've now had an evolution, and part of the plan was let's work with what we have in lots of different directions. So you're obviously talking about agriculture. My sense is you've also talked about livestock and like developing a research center around that and really growing that. I think you've talked about ag equipment, which is a different extension of that. So you're nodding. So it sounds like I'm in the right track. But then also tourism and your railroad history. Was all that kind of, am I on the right track here? That's
absolutely. Yeah, that's all part and parcel.
Battle River is focused more clearly on skill development of its residents, as well as giving them tools to grow. Here's Don.
We had to put confidence in our entrepreneurs in our region that they can produce products and ship them globally, give them the skills needed to be on an online platform. At the start, they just did it, maybe didn't see the big picture. And through our entrepreneur development strategy, we give them the tools to expand their business, to give them confidence to grow. Through some of our business support programs, we've given help if it's marketing or if it's accounting or fiscal. And that gives them confidence to grow that. As entrepreneurs, they have the drive, maybe not all the skills. And that's where we come in and help enhance the skills they already have, give them the confidence to grow their business and go from there. I think that was really huge. There's a lot of barriers to entrepreneurship, not barriers, but roadblocks. And we help navigate that through some government funding, or if they come up, they think trying to find funding through maybe a Western Economic Development or a Business Bank of Canada or anything like that, they find that very overwhelming. But we help them through that process to find that, streamline a lot of the red tape, work through a lot of their not issues, but their lack of capacity. And we help build their capacity, I guess, through our programming.
What emerges is that Hanna and Battle River are taking somewhat different approaches to business development. Before I explain, I caution that it's easy to overstate this difference. There are similarities when it comes to both communities trying to lure businesses and projects to their regions. But it does seem that Hanna leads its job creation efforts with a more targeted set of projects that are in line with skills in place or its history, as well as using its existing physical plant or natural resources. Without stretching this idea too far, the projects form attempts at setting industrial policy, if you will. Battle River, as you've heard, focuses more on skills development to support businesses. Therefore, job creation is to be more organic and perhaps more random. I put this to George and a colleague of his, Joel Maweni, in a follow-up conversation. Joel is the executive director at BREOC. They didn't disagree with this distinction, and they offered two thoughts for it. First, they noted that in part, Battle River's approach was a function that it was a collaboration of 7 communities, so it wasn't in the same position to target a specific priority for just one of them. George starts, and then Joel offers comparative color.
In Hanna, they're dealing with one community, where here we're dealing with 7.
I can note, like, for example, Estevan, which is in Saskatchewan, their economic development department or division deals directly with WD, within the government. So it's easy for them to just come with particular projects and just go about it. We do a collaborative model, and we come together, we discuss. So as George was mentioning, like greenhouses, that is an initiative. We are assisting them from BREOC, like actually funding things. We also don't have good broadband, so it's a huge priority for us. We are doing it collaboratively as well as a region, 7 communities.
Yeah.
With that said, George suggests that government support or philosophy has changed somewhat over time in Alberta towards being more flexible, in part with technology and enabler.
You know, years ago, what you said is absolutely true. Things had to fit in your area more. Now it's not quite the same because of all the technology we have and all the ability we have to get our products out. It's a different thing than it was 20 years ago.
Whether one approach will be more successful than the other remains to be seen. In part, that's because both efforts are in their early stages, and as we've heard, at least Hanna has had to redirect. More importantly, though, COVID has forced new priorities, and efforts have been focused on helping businesses survive as opposed to positioning them for growth. In terms of what these community leaders requested of government, as you might expect, one hears support for their priorities. But there is a theme around helping them build specific infrastructure that each have identified for their needs. As Laura describes, Parkland felt comfortable that worker support was being made available by the province.
There was provincial support. There was some training by the province, and so there was quite a bit of support, I would say, on the worker. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them would disagree, but just from my thought, there was support for the workers.
And thus, Parkland's asks are largely for specific highway projects.
Our biggest ask from the provincial government was really infrastructure support to support economic development, and then some sort of backstop with the tax loss. And so what we had been lobbying for very heavily, and it ended up being announced last year, and then we had a change in provincial government, and so it was re-announced again just not long ago, but we were really lobbying for an overpass that would just have better traffic flow into our industrial park, and it's a very big bottleneck there.
In Hanna, Chris first mentions more staffing support.
In the meantime, we had begun talks with the federal government because they had promised to work with coal-affected communities all across Canada. And I went, oh, good, here we go again. And ideally, honestly, it was the same. They reached out to us more than we did to them, which we appreciated. That was Anna and her crew. They had a really good working body, and they really focused hard on it. They really wanted to help us. So over time, we talked to them a little less project-based. So actual, building a solar generating station or whatever. We just said, look, we need resources. We need human resources. We can't work on this stuff by ourselves. We're, run to the bone. There was 4 of us that were doing all of this work. over the period of 3 years.
And then use of government funds to do extensive planning, including use of an outside consulting firm called 13 Ways. Here's Chris again.
Of course, government takes forever to do anything. So I think they came to Hanna, I think it was in May, and I don't think the final report was out until the next year. I think it was February the next year. But they did identify, they listened to us very well, and they identified, they said, these are the things that we think Hanna needs to make them go forward. They gave that to government, said, look, let's try to get them some funding. So then we said, okay, what do we need to do? Well, we need to have a direction. We need to have a strategic plan, but something that's very solid. It's going to set us, take us to the next level, to the next chapter. So that's where we hired 13 Ways, and they came, and we did a really extensive interview process with both residents and with council, just to see what direction do we want to go in. What is the best fit for Hanna?
And the outcome were some asks for specific infrastructure projects.
We applied to the federal government for, I believe it was $4.5 million worth of funding there's a pile of projects, irrigation projects in the rural area. Included in that is another solar project about 50 kilometers east of here, 30 miles, I guess it is. There's also, we want to redo our downtown. We're very fortunate because we have fiber internet here, so very high-speed internet in a rural community. So we do have an initiative through this $4 million as well. One of them is this Retire to Hanna initiative. So that's another one. Very large marketing strategy. That's another one. I think we put out, I believe it's 18 or 24 RFPs for consulting on all these, this $4.5 million.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got our hands full now.
In Battle River, there was a lot of emphasis placed on getting help from government to build 2 transition centers to help people and the community overall. Here's Don describing their goal for the transition centers.
Having those BREOC centers focused as not our primary goal, but one of the first initiatives we did, sent a message to the community that the federal government, the municipal government, and the provincial government are here to help. And they are, from the start, they were designed to be the center part for innovation, for entrepreneurship and development that way.
And then George provides a little color on what the money was put towards, followed by Don again, describing some of the services the centers facilitate.
Most of that money was used to buy equipment for the centers, not all of it, but a lot was. Because we had to put high-speed internet in, because neither one of the communities in that area had high-speed internet except to their schools and hospitals and the municipal offices.
In those BREOC centers, we have a lot of amenities that rural Albertas didn't have a lot of access to. We have boardrooms with TVs, with direct share. So our community members can go in there and effectively have meetings with anybody around the world, where we didn't have that. There's co-working spaces, there's huddle rooms, there's boardrooms, co-working desks with internet access. So if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have that internet access at home, you can come here, set up in a working space and have at her. And in those, we have photocopiers and all this stuff needed for a business to excel or to grow, it's all in one spot.
Similar to Hanna, the Battle River guys give a lot of credit to consultants hired with government funds for helping them along the way. Here's George speaking about its primary consultant, Lock Haven.
At the very start of this, if it wasn't for Lock Haven, we wouldn't have ever got on the road, because we had a very limited time to get the proposals in. And we sat down with 3 or 4 different outfits that do this sort of work, and we chose Lock Haven. And the reason we chose Lock Haven was because they had done a lot of this with government, and they'd worked with the federal government in the past, not the provincial, but the federal. And so they had an inside.
And then finally, when asked what they wish the government had not done, these leaders stressed that they wished they had been engaged in the process before the decision was made for the plant closures, so that provincial government could have appreciated the impacts and planned for them. Here's Laura from Parkland County.
Basically, our issue has been that the provincial and federal government specifically provincial, had sped up the accelerated phase out of coal, which obviously we support. We think that, we need to move forward, and we need to move forward into new power generation and new technologies and all that. So not speaking out against that policy decision, but just the fact that the government provided so much funding to the private industry to phase out coal at an accelerated pace, and we don't feel it was taken into consideration the tax impacts on us. They're a major revenue source for Parkland County, and we were certainly down the path of supplementing that revenue source, because we had expected about 2030 that things would phase out, but we obviously didn't expect that it would be 2020. So we are in the situation where, for argument's sake, like $50 million of tax, then $7 million of that was being impacted.
Hanna's Chris Warwick echoes the comment.
I think the biggest mistake, and I think both our federal and provincial governments made, but the provincial government for sure, the biggest mistake they made was not consulting with municipalities, and I'll call it large emitters, because they're really the ones that were affected by our climate leadership plan and the carbon emissions levy, or carbon tax that they called it. So I don't think they expected the implications like we're experiencing, and they could have, if all they had to do was reach out and say, hey, what would happen to your generating station if we impose a 5% tax on the emissions at your generating station? What would happen there? Simple answer would be, we're gonna probably shut it down and lose all these jobs.
George and Don of Battle River pointed out that the original funding offer from the federal government was 2 years, far too quick to plan and execute on steps to transition a community. Further, they needed to negotiate having flexibility in how to spend the funds from the government.
We met with them in Forestburg, and they told us that we were eligible for this money, but it was a 2-year plan. And we told them, no, we didn't want 2 years. We wanted a 5-year plan, because we said it would be impossible for us to get all this accomplished in 2 years. So they came back and they did agree to give us 5 years, and we're still working on, we've got 3 years left, I guess.
Okay. The idea you could successfully transition an entire region within 2 years of funding, it didn't make any sense. So we really worked on to make things successful, give us the tools and the ability to don't pigeonhole the funding. So we have the ability to every year to re-examine where we're at in our growth, our challenges. And then at a community level, elected official George and I and the 7 communities can really change course in a lot of that. So a good example is the pandemic. We couldn't predict that, but we were able to pivot away from maybe entrepreneurial development, because when you're locked down, it's tough to meet and tough to put on programs. So we did supports for the business community as PPE and access. And so we pivoted there. And now, right now, we're reassessing our community, where our needs are at. And then we'll do another year plan. We plan a year and ahead for the funding.